Okay, we are looking at the absolute value graph P of X, and we're going to figure out where it's increasing, decreasing, positive, negative, the domain, the range, and the end behavior. So we're just going to go one piece at a time here. Let's look at increasing first. So as a reminder, when you are looking for where a graph is increasing, if you imagine walking along the graph, so if I imagine a little dude standing over here, and walking left to right, we are going to try and figure out where he would be going uphill. So he'd be walking downhill until he reaches the bottom, and then over here on the right hand side he'd be going uphill. So we're going to use our x values to describe where he starts and where he stops going uphill. So if I look at the minimum down there at the bottom of the absolute value function, he is starting to go uphill at -3. And if he is walking along this blue highlighted portion, because I have that arrow, that means my absolute value graph is going on and on forever towards the right. So that is towards positive infinity. With increasing and decreasing, we are always going to use parentheses. In the next part, we are looking for where he's going to be going downhill, because we're talking about decreasing. So at first is where he is going downhill, and then he reaches the bottom and turns around and starts going up. So if we start left to right, since there's an arrow, it's going really far to the left. That is our x value of -infinity. And then once he reaches the bottom is at -3 is where he's going to stop and turn and start going uphill. Again, always parentheses with increasing and decreasing. Okay? If we look at the next part, we're looking at negative versus positive. Negative is below the x-axis, and positive is where a graph is above the x-axis. So let's look at below first. So here is my x-axis, that's our horizontal axis, and I want this chunk that is below the x-axis, and we're just talking from what x value to what x value. So left to right, I am going from -7 all the way to +1. Now, at these 2 points, we need to decide if there's a parentheses or a bracket. So as a little reminder, a parenthesis means not included. And if you have a bracket, that means it is included. So when I look at this point, both of them are actually x-intercepts at -7 and at 1. We want to ask ourselves, are those 2 points negative? Or in other words, are they below the x-axis? And since they're on the x-axis, that means they are not below it, so we're going to use parentheses. If we go ahead and we switch gears and we look at positive, I'm looking for where my graph is above the x-axis. So I have this portion off to the left, and this portion off to the right. So because I have 2 separate pieces of my graph that are above the x-axis, I'm going to have 2 intervals. So if I look at the left, I'm going from the left arrow, which is at -infinity, to that x-intercept at -7. And then if I look at my point at -7, I have to ask myself, is that point positive? Is it above the x-axis? And the answer is no, it is not, because it's on the x-axis, so I'm going to use a parentheses. We need our union to combine this with our second interval, which is going from 1 to infinity. At 1, similar question, we're asking ourselves, is that x-intercept positive? Is it above the x-axis? And since it's on it, the answer is no, which means it's not included. So we're going to use a parentheses. Okay. Next order of business is we are looking at the domain and the range. So domain is all of our x values, which means we are looking furthest left to furthest right. So if I look at my graph, my furthest left is this arrow, and since it's going to the left forever, that's negative infinity. And if I follow my graph down and back up again, the furthest right thing is this arrow, and since it's an arrow, it's going to the right forever. So my domain is all real numbers, or negative infinity to infinity. If I think about my range, that is all of my y values. So we are going from bottom to top. So I want to know how low the graph goes to how high it goes. If I look down here, I have no graph until I hit that minimum value, which is at a y value of -4. And if I keep working my way up, because I have these arrows pointing up towards the sky, my graph is going to go up forever towards infinity. Infinity symbols always have parentheses, and at -4, because that is a y value that's on my graph, this point is at -3, -4. It is included, and so I'm going to use a bracket. All right, last thing is our end behavior. So we're going to go ahead and write our limit notation. So I have the limit of our graph, which is p of x, as x approaches infinity. And I have the limit of our graph p of x as x goes towards negative infinity. So a few reminders with end behaviors, we're looking at both ends of our graph. So as x's go towards positive infinity, that means we're looking at our right arrow. So I am looking over here, and when we answer it, we're talking about whether or not our arrow is going up or down. So what value is it approaching? And since that arrow is going up forever, it is going to approach infinity. Similarly, when we look at the left arrow, so as my x's get more negative, I'm looking at the left arrow, and it is also pointing up, which means it's going to approach infinity because it's going up forever.